Zyler Lancaster had everything. A billion-dollar empire, a lavish lifestyle, and a beautiful wife, Elara, who carried his unborn child. But beneath the surface of their picture-perfect marriage lurked a devastating secret. When Elara uncovered Zyler's secret trip to Paris with his mistress, Liora, she didn't just expose his betrayal, she set in motion a downfall so brutal that he never saw it coming. Zyler Lancaster had everything a man could ever want: wealth, power, and a picture-perfect marriage to Elara, a woman who was as beautiful as she was devoted. To outsiders, their life seemed flawless. They lived in a sprawling estate, attended exclusive events, and were admired by many as the epitome of success. But beneath the polished exterior, a storm was brewing, one that Elara never saw coming. 8 months pregnant, she was in the final stages of preparing for their baby's arrival. Every detail had been carefully planned, from the nursery's soft ivory and gold theme to the name they had chosen together. Zyler had always promised he would be there for every milestone, yet in recent months he had been distant. Business trips had become more frequent, phone calls shorter, and his once warm embrace felt colder. Elara brushed off her concerns, convincing herself that stress was simply taking its toll on him. Running a billion-dollar empire came with responsibilities, and she understood that. She reminded herself that Zyler had always been a devoted husband, the kind who left handwritten notes by her bedside when he had to travel and never missed a chance to remind her how much he loved her. But those gestures had become rare, replaced by hurried goodbyes and vague explanations about work emergencies. One evening, as she sat in their elegantly furnished living room, sorting through baby gifts from well-wishers, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. Curiosity turned to confusion as she hesitated before opening it. The message contained only a single photograph, grainy yet unmistakable. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. The image showed a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was all too familiar to her. He was dressed in an expensive suit, standing on a Parisian balcony, his arm wrapped around a woman. The woman was stunning. Long legs, flowing blonde hair, and a striking face that radiated confidence. She was leaning into him, their posture intimate, the kind of closeness that couldn't be mistaken for anything innocent. Beneath the image, a short message was typed. "You deserve to know the truth." Elara's breath caught in her throat. For a few moments, she simply sat there, unable to process what she was looking at. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed in on the image, searching for something, anything, that could prove it was a mistake. Maybe it was an old photograph. Maybe it wasn't even him. But the more she looked, the harder it was to deny. The watch on his wrist was the one she had gifted him on their anniversary. The way he stood, the sharp angle of his jaw, it was him. A sharp pain shot through her stomach, forcing her to take deep, steadying breaths. She placed a protective hand over her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the heartbreak unraveling. Inside her, the air in the room felt heavier, the walls suddenly closing in. Her world, which had once felt so stable, was now cracking beneath her feet. Her first instinct was to call him, demand an explanation. But something held her back. If he was in Paris, then that meant he had lied about where he was supposed to be. He had told her he was on a business trip in Singapore, handling an important merger. But this picture told a different story. A story of deception, betrayal, and secrets she hadn't even begun to uncover. Elara swallowed hard, trying to think rationally. The pain in her chest was unbearable, but she refused to let it consume her. This wasn't just about her anymore. She had a baby to think about, a future that she needed to protect. If Zyler had been lying to her, how long had it been going on? And if he had gone to such lengths to keep it hidden, what else was he hiding? Her hands clenched into fists as a realization settled deep into her bones. She couldn't confront him, yet. Not without proof. Not without a plan. If there was one thing she had learned from being married to a man like Zyler, it was that power belonged to those who knew how to wield information. For the first time in their marriage, she would stop trusting him. And for the first time in her life, she would take control of her own fate. Elara couldn't sleep that night. The image on her phone was burned into her mind, playing over and over like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the weight of betrayal settled deep into her bones. The room, once a sanctuary filled with warmth and love, now felt cold and unfamiliar. Zyler's side of the bed was empty, as it had been for weeks. He had told her he was handling urgent business in Singapore, but now she knew that was a lie. He was in Paris with another woman, living a life she knew nothing about. Morning came, but the heaviness in her chest didn't fade. She went through the motions of her routine, pretending everything was normal, even though her world had just been shattered. She needed answers, but she couldn't let emotions cloud her judgment. She had to be smart. Acting impulsively could backfire, and she wasn't willing to give Zyler any advantage. She sat at the dining table sipping tea, her hands shaking slightly as she opened her laptop. The first thing she checked was his recent financial transactions. Zyler never hid money from her, at least that's what she had always believed. She accessed their shared banking accounts and credit card statements, scanning for anything suspicious. At first, everything seemed normal. Then, she noticed something. There were multiple charges from high-end restaurants and luxury boutiques in Paris. These weren't business expenses. The names of the places stood out. Romantic, spots she had dreamed of visiting with him. Her stomach churned as she realized he had been wining and dining another woman in the city of love while she was home preparing for their child. The truth was undeniable now, but she needed more. She decided to take things a step further. Hiring. A private investigator wasn't something she had ever imagined doing, but desperate times called for desperate measures. After hours of research, she found the perfect person. Vaughn Mercer, a former intelligence officer turned investigator. His reputation for uncovering high-profile secrets was exactly what she needed. Within an hour of her reaching out, he responded, agreeing to take the case. Days passed, each one stretching endlessly as she waited for answers. She kept up appearances, acting like everything was fine when friends and family checked in. She responded to Zyler's texts with short, neutral messages, pretending she believed he was in Singapore. Meanwhile, Vaughn was in Paris, following every lead. When the report finally arrived, it was worse than she had imagined. Surveillance photos showed Zyler arriving at a luxurious penthouse, his hand resting on the lower back of the woman from the photograph. More images followed: romantic dinners, shopping sprees, stolen kisses in hidden corners. The woman's identity was confirmed. Liora Vance, a model with a reputation for being linked to wealthy men. Elara had seen her name in magazines before, never suspecting that she would one day be at the center of her personal nightmare. But there was more. Vaughn had dug deeper and uncovered something even more disturbing. Zyler had been transferring large sums of money into an offshore account under Liora's name. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars quietly moved without Elara's knowledge. This wasn't just an affair. He was building a future with another woman, preparing for a life where Elara and their unborn child didn't exist. A sharp, cold rage replaced the heartbreak she had felt. This wasn't a simple betrayal. It was premeditated. Zyler had been planning this for months, if not longer. He had been playing the role of a devoted husband while secretly constructing a life without her. She set the papers down, her hands trembling, but her mind was clearer than ever. She knew what she had to do. Confronting him would be too easy. She wanted him to feel the pain she was feeling, to watch his empire crumble the way he had tried to erase her from his future. She wasn't just going to expose him, she was going to destroy him. Elara knew she had to act carefully. Zyler was a man who thrived on control, always staying 10 steps ahead of everyone around him. If she wanted to take him down, she couldn't afford to make a single mistake. She spent the next few days carefully, strategizing, making sure he never suspected a thing. She continued answering his calls, pretending to believe he was still in Singapore. She sent him updates about the baby, acted excited about his return, and even played the role of a loving wife. But beneath the surface, she was preparing for. Or the first step was securing her own finances. Zyler had always provided for her, but that was by design. He wanted her dependent on him. She had access to their accounts, but most of their wealth was tied up in investments, real estate, and business assets under his name. If he decided to leave her, he could make things very difficult. She wasn't going to give him that chance. Using a lawyer she had secretly hired, she began moving money into a private account only she could access. It wasn't about greed, it was about survival. She had to protect herself and their unborn child from whatever Zyler had planned. Every transaction was carefully hidden, each step taken with precision. Next, she needed more leverage. Vaughn had already exposed Zyler's affair and offshore accounts, but she wanted something that would completely ruin him. She instructed Vaughn to dig deeper into Zyler's business dealings. If he was willing to betray his wife, there was no telling what other secrets he had buried. The results came back faster than she expected. Vaughn uncovered a series of illegal financial activities linked to Zyler's company: fraud, tax evasion, and insider trading. The evidence was damning. If the authorities got their hands on it, Zyler wouldn't just lose his empire, he would go to prison. Elara felt a strange sense of calm as she looked through the files. She had spent years believing in this man, building a life with him, trusting him with everything. And now, she realized he had never been the man she thought he was. He was a liar, a criminal, and a coward. He had planned to abandon her while she carried his child, thinking she would never find out. But she did. And she wasn't going to stay silent. The final part of her plan was public exposure. Zyler cared about his reputation more than anything. His company was built on his image, a self-made billionaire, a devoted husband, a soon-to-be father. If the world discovered the truth, everything he had worked for would collapse. Elara contacted a well-known journalist, someone who had been investigating corporate corruption for years. She anonymously provided them with everything: details of the affair, financial records, and illegal transactions. She knew once the story broke, there would be no turning back. As she waited for the right moment, she prepared for Zyler's return. She acted like nothing had changed, making sure he never suspected a thing. She continued nesting, buying baby clothes, decorating the nursery, and attending doctor's appointments as if everything was normal. But inside, she was counting down the days. Then, just as she planned, the story went live. News outlets exploded with the scandal. Billionaire Zyler Lancaster's secret life exposed, affair, fraud, and millions in hidden funds. Within hours, his world began to fall apart. Investors panicked, stocks plummeted, and law enforcement agencies launched an investigation. The internet was flooded with pictures of Zyler and Liora in Paris, along with financial documents linking him to criminal activities. Elara watched it all unfold from the safety of her home, feeling a sense of justice she never thought possible. Zyler had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. Zyler's world collapsed in a matter of hours. The moment the story broke, everything he had built began crumbling beneath him. Investors pulled out, business partners distanced themselves, and legal authorities launched a full-scale investigation into his financial dealings. His carefully curated image as a powerful billionaire and devoted husband had been shattered. Elara knew he would return home the moment he realized what had happened. She prepared herself, ensuring that every detail of her plan was in place. Her lawyer had secured her financial future. Her name was completely separated from any of Zyler's illegal activities, and she had documented everything necessary to protect herself legally. She was no longer a helpless wife. She was in control, just as she predicted. Zyler arrived in the middle of the night. The roar of his car's engine cut through the silence as he pulled into the driveway. Elara stood in the shadows of the living room, watching through the window as he stormed out of the car. His movements were erratic, frantic. He had never been in this position before, out of control, cornered. She could hear the front door unlock. He entered with heavy footsteps, his breath ragged. Papers and mail littered the floor where he had thrown them, his frantic search for any sign of damage evident in the disarray. His phone was glued to his hand as he made desperate calls, but no one was answering. His lawyers, business associates, and even his closest confidants had abandoned him the moment his downfall became public. Elara remained still, letting him spiral. She wanted him to feel every ounce of panic and fear, the same emotions she had felt when she first discovered his betrayal. She watched as he poured himself a drink, his hands shaking. He paced the room, checking emails, scrolling through news articles and trying to find a way out. But there was none. She had made sure of that. Then his eyes landed on her. The realization hit him like a brick. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused. She wasn't even angry. She was just watching. And that was when he understood. She had known all along. For the first time in his life, Zyler Lancaster had lost. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. His empire was gone, his reputation destroyed, and the world had turned against him. And the worst part? The person who had orchestrated his downfall was the one he had underestimated the most, his own wife. Elara turned away, walking toward the nursery. She placed a gentle hand on her stomach, feeling the slight movement of the life growing inside her. She had won. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about moving forward, reclaiming her life, and ensuring that her child would never be controlled by a man like Zyler. Behind her, she could hear his sharp exhale, the sound of a man who had lost everything. He wasn't the billionaire in control anymore. He was nothing more than a desperate, broken man. Elara had taken everything from him, just as he had planned to do to her, and there was still one final blow left to deliver. Zyler sat in the darkened living room, his mind racing through the wreckage of his once perfect life. Everything was gone. His wealth, his power, his reputation. He had spent years building an empire, only for it to collapse overnight. But the worst part wasn't the financial ruin or the public disgrace. It was the realization that Elara had done this to him. The woman he had once believed was fragile, naive, and dependent on him had outmaneuvered him in every way. Elara stood in the nursery, her hands resting gently on her stomach. She had thought this moment would bring her satisfaction, that seeing Zyler finally suffer would make her feel triumphant. But there was no joy in watching him crumble. She had won the battle, but there was still one thing left to do. She had to make sure he never found a way to crawl back. In the days that followed, the fallout from the scandal only worsened. More evidence surfaced, revealing Zyler's years of fraudulent dealings and offshore accounts. Federal investigators swarmed his business headquarters, seizing documents and freezing assets. He was officially under investigation, and the possibility of prison loomed over him. His legal team scrambled to salvage what they could, but the damage was irreversible. Meanwhile, Elara finalized her divorce. With the help of her lawyers, she secured full custody of their unborn child, ensuring Zyler would have no legal claim over the baby. She filed restraining orders, locked down her financial independence, and distanced herself completely from the mess he had created. Zyler, in a desperate bid to salvage his life, reached out to the only people he thought would still support him, his Mistress Liora and a handful of close business associates. But he quickly learned that loyalty had its limits. Liora had disappeared, vanishing the moment his fortune crumbled. She had used him for wealth and status, and now that he had nothing, she had no reason to stay. His business partners, once eager to be associated with his success, refused to take his calls. He was radioactive. No one wanted to be tied to a man facing criminal charges and public humiliation. For the first time in his life, Zyler Lancaster was truly alone. Elara, on the other hand, was finally free. She moved into a new home, one he had no access to, and surrounded herself with people who truly cared for her. She focused on her health, her baby, and the life she was about to begin without him. The final blow came when law enforcement issued an arrest warrant for Zyler. The authorities had gathered enough evidence to charge him with financial crimes, including tax evasion, fraud, and embezzlement. The moment he was taken into custody, the last shred of his old life was destroyed. The media swarmed, capturing images of the once powerful billionaire being led away in handcuffs. The same world that once admired him now watched as he was reduced to nothing more than a disgraced criminal. Elara saw the news but didn't linger on it. She had already moved on. Zyler's fate was no longer her concern. Months later, as she held her newborn baby in her arms, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had escaped a life built on lies, deception, and manipulation. She had won not because she had destroyed Zyler, but because she had rebuilt herself. Zyler had thought he could control her, that she would always be beneath him. But he had underestimated the power of a woman determined to protect herself and her child, and that was a mistake he would never recover from.